Hello, home listeners. How are you? This episode of JJ Meets World is special because we are flipping the mics around and Tucker will be interviewing me this whole time. You find a little bit about my history as far as family goes, why I love improv, and you're even going to find out a little something about my favorite childhood beverage and how angry I am that it no longer exists. So sit back, pour yourself a cold glass of Ecto Cooler, and listen to this episode of JJ Meets World.
1, 2, 3, 4. JJ Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. JJ has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirled as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called JJ Meets World.
In 1989, High C released a new flavor fruit drink featuring an image of Slimer from the real Ghostbusters called Ecto Cooler. It was a repurpose of High C's Citrus Cooler, which had been around since the 60s. It's notable that Ecto Cooler was made in light of Ghostbusters 2, which was in theaters when released. The drink did surprisingly well in some markets and continued way beyond the real Ghostbusters run and wasn't discontinued until 1997. Slimer left the box sometime around 1997, but Minute Maid did not discontinue the product until 2001, at which point it was renamed Shoutin' Orange Tanger Green. Slimer was replaced on the packaging by a similar-looking blob of lips. The product was still noted as Ecto Cool on many store receipts. During the Shoutin' Orange Tanger Green era, the formula was changed along with the rest of the line of High C drinks to Won't Stain formula. While it did not taste any different, it did change to a yellowish green. In 2006, Shoutin' Orange Tanger Green was renamed Crazy Citrus Cooler. In 2007, Crazy Citrus Cooler was discontinued. On September 15th, 2015, Coca-Cola filed to renew the Ecto Cooler trademark. Then appearing on eBay on February 18th, 2016 was a prototype can. The new can did not feature the iconic Slimer, but notes the 2016 film and the green slime motif. On April 25th, 2016, it was announced Ecto Cooler would be available for a limited time beginning on May 30th. It would be sold in packs of 6-ounce juice boxes or 11.5-ounce aluminum cans. The cans are specifically printed using thermal ink that turns an eerie shade of slime green when the product inside is cold. There will be a contest held up until May 30th. Fans can enter for a chance to win it before it's available for purchase. Fans were instructed to follow at Ecto Cooler on Twitter and Ecto Cooler on Facebook. It will be sold exclusively in the United States of America. On November 2nd, 2016, it was announced that Ecto Cooler was going to be discontinued by December 2016. Let me tell you about the bullshit that is Ecto Cooler. It is my favorite drink from my childhood. I love Ecto Cooler. And it is horseshit that this is going on. Now, I'm getting a weird look from my producer because I was supposed to be doing a quick 30-second little intro for you guys. But what I'm getting into now, what's important for me to tell you, is that I love Ecto Cooler. And I love it a lot. And this whole episode is going to be about Tucker interviewing me. And I think that he will forget to ask me about childhood beverages. So I'm going to take my intro time here to focus it solely on my love of Ecto Cooler. When this came out, I bought 50 cans of Ecto Cooler and I enjoyed it. I drank it over ice, and now that I'm an adult drinking it, I mixed it with vodka. It was delicious. Just exactly how it tasted. It tasted like childhood. Like I was tasting 1994. I might as well have been riding my bike to the movie theater to see Jurassic Park again. So I guess what I'm saying here is if anyone from the High C Corporation is listening to this, I really would appreciate you bringing back any version of Ecto Cooler, even if it's shouting orange tanger green or citrus what the hell ever. It doesn't matter. I would just like to see Ecto Cooler come back in some way, shape, or form. Now, this episode features Tucker, my producer, interviewing me. So this is the JJ Meets World deep dive into JJ episode. You guys are going to enjoy this because I'm going to tell you some tips, some pro tips from my life. Tucker gets into some personal aspects of who I am and what I like to do. And before it's done, we're going to cry a little together. We're going to laugh. We're going to have a great time. And I want to give a shout out to Andrew over at Spotlight Media, who always tells me what episode he's listening to when I bump into him. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate you. I appreciate all the listeners, and I hope you enjoy this episode of JJ Meets World, where Tucker interviews me.
JJ Meets World.
Oh, so many.
That one's not going.
So many.
That one's getting cut out.
Oh, you're going to cut that one out?
If you want me to. I think I will.
Yeah, but I think you should just come in where we're talking about cutting it out.
Yeah.
So we cut that out, and then people will be like, I wonder what they cut out.
I wonder what they cut out. Well,
It'll be like they'll come up to me and say, what does the JJ stand for? And I won't tell them.
If you had been in the studio for the past couple minutes, you would know what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, you're coming in on the podcast right now. Mm-hmm. So you have a very, maybe it's not singular, but to me, it's a very singular upbringing in that you did a lot of your own and your sister's parenting.
Yes.
And that has definitely shaped your personality. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I love my parents. I lost my dad when I was 19. My mom died when I was, 32? Mm-hmm. 32 years old. And both of them were alcoholics. Two completely different alcoholics. My dad was the fun-loving alcoholic, and my mom was the mean one. And because of that disease, they weren't around a lot. And so I took this de facto role to start raising myself. So when I was like 6 years old, I figured out how to look up Domino's number in the phone book and order a pizza. And I begrudgingly did the same thing to kind of help my sister, but I used to ride my bike to the grocery store and get groceries. And before you think that like I was alone all the time, I wasn't, but there were just pockets of time where I just wouldn't have any parental supervision because the throes of alcoholism. Mm-hmm. And so that I think really did shape me as a person. So I have had the mentality of a 50-year-old man since I was like 12, which is why I love cribbage so much.
But also musicals. I
love a good musical.
Well, I think we're going a little too far afield. Let's stay on the
Do you ever hear when someone says they were born in the wrong era?
Yeah, and I really dislike that.
Yeah,
so
I was born in the wrong era.
What things don't you like having? The internet, air conditioning? What are the things that you wish you didn't have to deal with?
I just feel that if it was the late 1960s, I would be the toast of the town. Everyone would be commenting about like, there goes that dapper. Like, for example, I think it's atrocious that people don't get dressed up to ride on planes anymore.
Well, you could start.
I do. I don't just go onto a plane willy-nilly, bring my Twilby cap, and I sit down there and I
doff it.
Yeah.
Try to light a cigarette, and they're like, sorry, sir, no. And you're like, but this is the 1960s.
I digress. One of my good friends and I were at a music festival in Gulf Shores, Alabama, and the next day we got onto an airplane, and we had done a fair amount of drinking, and this guy was pretty gross. In fact, he fell asleep with a jar of queso dip on his chest.
I know exactly who it is.
Yeah, and so the queso dip is all in his chest hair. So
we're probably safe to use his name on this podcast.
Phil
Lund.
His name is Phil.
Not Phil Goodell, Phil Lund.
Phil and I were sitting in separate seats, and the woman, he kind of goes up and he has to sit next to this woman. He goes, excuse me, that's my seat over there. And she looks up and she goes, God, why are you so sweaty? And he goes, I was just at a concert. Move over.
There's this thing that we all use who know Phil called the Phil voice.
It kind of goes like this.
Grandma, I need some more money.
We love our good impressions of Phil, but that's the exact reason, right?
Yeah.
So Phil is the type of person who I was like, I'd never want to sit next to him on a plane.
Yeah. Well,
I want to live in a time where, we're hippies and
plenty of hippies now.
yeah, there are.
Absolutely. But to tie it back into what we were just talking about with your parents and your upbringing, I barely knew you when your dad passed, so I never knew him. I knew your mom. And after high school, I spent a lot of time at your house and saw the kind of world you lived in that your house was like this place where all your friends would just pop in and out all the time. There was always something going on there.
Revolving door
of people. And, you were at the center of it. But then anywhere you would go, that seemed to follow you as well.
Yeah.
Like you were someone who has always had just a swarm of activity surrounding them. And to put a finer point on it, a cliche you hear all the time is when someone says, oh, my life should be a reality show. Or, oh, my job should be a reality show, the things that happen here. But it's not cliche when it's said about you, because that's very, very true. I mean, you've had some crazy adventures.
Yeah, there's been some pretty wild stuff. So I am a firm believer I'm obviously big into improv, and I forget who the quote is attributed to, but it says the fun is always on the other side of yes. Is the quote. And so that's why you say yes in improv and you accept things, the gifts that people give you in scenes. And I've applied that kind of to life a little bit. It's harder every year as I get into my 30s. I'm sure it's going to be harder when I have a wife and children.
Yeah.
Because your yes is in a different form. Your yes is to that responsibility. It changed when I got a full-time job. It changed when I started becoming more, of a notable person in Fargo, Moorhead, because all of a sudden now I can't, do as crazy of certain things as I was doing before. But here's a good story where fun is always on the other side of yes. I'm a big fan of Garth Brooks. Big fan. He's a hell of a showman.
Yeah, no shame in that at all.
I'm not a big country music fan, but I love me some Garth Brooks.
Standing outside the fire.
Yeah, the Thunder Rolls. Which is about like a guy who cheats on his wife.
The dance.
Oh. Or my favorite is Unanswered Prayers. Have you ever heard that?
I have. But my favorite is Ain't Going Down Till the Sun Comes Up.
Is it really? So, about the teenagers having sex.
Just outed myself as a Garth Brooks fan, but it was
good for you.
Garth Brooks played all the time in my mom's house because my mom is a massive Garth Brooks fan, and he had a concert here in, I want to say 93?
94, I think it was, yeah.
And I remember that because my mom had a story of some friend of hers in town, through whatever reason, got tasked with doing his laundry before the show that night. And like they were trying on his pants and they were doing this weird stuff with Garth Brooks. Garth Brooks's pants. Weird stuff with Garth Brooks's pants.
So
that might be the title of the episode. I don't know.
So this is perfect because this lays into it. So I went and saw Garth Brooks in the cities when he had his big revival tour. And I'm driving back from the cities and there's a concert going on in Fargo. I'm not going to tell you who it is because that's part of the story.
Okay.
And I get a phone call from some friends of mine who I worked with at WeFest, Crystal Bliss. And Crystal said, hey, I got a weird question for you. So I'm working security at the Dome and I don't know, did you know who's playing tonight? And I was like, I don't know. And he goes, well, it's Motley Crue and Alice Cooper. I said, okay. Well, here's the deal. So their next show is in Canada. They head up to Canada after this. And Alice can't take his snake to Canada because of, laws. So he gets a Canadian snake when he's up there, but his current snake needs to get shipped to an animal sanctuary in St. Louis. But the concert's tonight, Sunday, and FedEx won't be able to take the snake until tomorrow morning. So how do you feel about taking the snake overnight and then bringing it tomorrow? What they would do is they would give you tickets to the concert and then you could have a meet and greet with Alice Cooper. And so I was like, oh, no, click. And I hang up.
Oh, my God. I wasn't expecting this twist.
Right? And so Jill and my mom and our good friend Ione Pearson are listening to this conversation. We're driving back from the cities. And they're like, what's that? And I'm like, they wanted me to take Alice Cooper's snake. And Jill goes, what? And I'm like, yeah, they're going to let me have a meet and greet with Alice Cooper. And she goes, what? And I said, yeah, but I hate snakes. My biggest irrational fear is a snake popping out of the toilet.
What happened to fun is on the other side of yes?
So that's the thing. So Jill reminds me that it would be stupid not to do this. So I called Crystal back. I said, okay, so sure, I'll take Alice Cooper's snake. And she said, okay, great. I'm going to put 2 tickets for you at Will Call, and then Alice's handler will talk to you and give you all the information you need. And I said, okay, but I don't have to do anything, right? Like, I don't have to give it a bath or, I don't know what you do with it. I don't have to walk it.
Yeah. Yeah.
They said, nope. They'll put it in a box. You never even have to open the box.
Right.
And I said, well, I'll probably open the box just to make sure that there aren't drugs in there, because the worst thing that would happen is me getting arrested as some kind of a drug mule. So I decide not to go to the concert. So Jill and her sister go to the concert, who are big Alice Cooper fans.
Okay.
So they go to the show. They get to meet Alice. They get to interact with the snake, whose name is Count Strangula.
That's a great name.
Great name for a snake, right? And then when they're watching the show and the snake comes out, they're like, oh, look, it's Count Strangula. He's going to be sleeping at our house tonight. So I was remodeling my house at the time. So I was actually staying at my mother's house. So I wasn't going to bring Count Strangula to my mother's house because she had a toy poodle.
Oh, yeah.
And I've seen enough sitcoms to know how that works.
How this one shakes out.
Yeah. So we brought Count Strangula over to my other house, and we opened the little bag and took a picture of it was a she of her little head and everything like that. And the next day it was like, okay, well, we'll take Count Strangula in to.
I'm guessing this is a boa constrictor.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
Okay,
and all they do is they put it in a pillowcase, and then the pillowcase is inside one of those styrofoam coolers with a bunch of holes popped in it.
Sure, yep.
Because they got to keep it warm. It's got to stay warm, and then that's inside of a box.
Got it.
So we put Count Strangula in there, and then I have a nightmare that night that she gets loose, and then I've got all this exposed ductwork in my house because I'm remodeling, and then I've got to keep putting mice and junk down through the
This would be a great premise for like a John Candy movie.
Really would, wouldn't it? Or a single episode of Friends.
Yeah.
So she doesn't get out. The next day, I take the snake with Jill's sister Amy over to FedEx, and I said, hello, my name is JJ Gordon. I am shipping Alice Cooper's snake. And they go, no, you're not. We don't accept that. You can't just ship a snake. No live animals. Gross. I said, here is a letter from, this animal sanctuary with the specific number and a contract they have with FedEx. And so you can tell this person is pissed.
Yeah.
Because now they have to accept a box with a giant snake in it.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, it is guaranteed to be on a flight within 4 hours of getting there, and it's delivered within an hour of touchdown. So it's a very fragile, important package. And so that's...
Wow, that's crazy.
And I happen to have friends who are on a rock station in Fargo at the time. And so I said, listen, I don't know if you think this would be interesting tomorrow, but you get a story with the guy who took care of Count Strangula last night. So that was, those are the kind of adventures that I think you're referring to that surround my life.
One of many, yeah.
Yeah, weird stuff.
Yeah, and if anything, it's almost making me reconsider why we made a podcast where you're interviewing other people. I mean, you could be Stephen Tobolowski-ing this thing, every episode. But
well, let me tell you about the time I met Stephen Tobolowski.
Here you go.
So...
How's that for a segue?
Yeah, right? Brent Brandt, who is... Brent Brandt. I think he loves listening to this podcast because he gets to hear his name mentioned all the time.
In different creative ways.
Yeah, Brent Brandt. So, Brent Brandt, I meet him when he brings Sean Astin to Fargo. They announced they're bringing Sean Astin to Fargo for... It's a fundraiser for the Fargo Theater and Hero Healthcare Equipment Recycling Organization. And... I buy VIP tickets to Sean Astin because I know Jill's going to just flip. And I'll actually, before I get to the Tobo thing,
okay.
The VIP tickets to meet Sean Astin were $150 a pop. And I spent $600 to get 4 of them. 2 of them were for people like in line vendors. And it was all a business expense for line vendors anyway. And then 1 for Jill and I. Because Jill claims that in the early 2000s, she was at the Burger King on 19th Avenue North, and Sean Astin was there by himself eating a cheeseburger. And she and her sister were positive. Now, this is right before cell phone cameras were even a thing.
Okay.
So they said, we're positive it's Sean Astin.
When exactly was it? So Lord of the Rings was out?
So this would have been right before Lord of the Rings.
Okay, so they would know him from Rudy.
From Goonies.
Goonies, yeah.
Discworld, maybe.
Okay.
One of the many, 50 First Dates.
Got it.
So they did some research that you could do at the time that said Sean Astin had some family in northern Minnesota or something. So It makes sense that he would have flown into Fargo and rented a car and drove to this place. So that's what makes sense, is that Sean Astin was on his way to visit family and he just had to have a Whopper. So I spend $300 for she and I to get this VIP package that includes a meet and greet. And my sole intention is to say, hi, Sean, I'm JJ Gordon. Listen, have you ever been to the Burger King here in Fargo before? Think really, really hard, because I'm going to rub it in my girlfriend's face if you didn't. And lo and behold, I was on a radio station that was allowed to get an interview with him.
Nice.
So he's on the plane, about to get on the plane to Fargo. And I called him up and I said, hey, Sean, we're going to interview you. And we had a great interview. And I said, because I'm a big fan of his dad as well. Are you familiar with his dad?
No.
So his dad was the original Gomez Addams on the Addams Family.
No way.
Yeah.
Huh.
John Astin. And he was in the Attack of the Killer Tomatoes movies, Return of the Killer Tomatoes as the mad scientist. He's in my favorite episode of Tales from the Crypt with John Lovitz, where he thinks he's playing Hamlet, but it turns out that it's an insane asylum where all of the inmates have broken out and they're putting on a play and they just want his skull. Good stuff. Very, 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 very talented man. And so I talked to him about his dad a bunch in this interview. And I also bring up the thing. I said, listen, my girlfriend's a big fan of yours, but I got to know, were you ever at the Burger King? And he goes, no. I can tell you this is the first time I've ever been to Fargo. I'm like, you're positive. You didn't just pass through. And he goes, no, you remember when you go to Fargo, North Dakota. So I said, okay, great. Thanks, man. So now that that's out of the way, I figured, well, we can just have a nice time chatting when we get there. And so meeting him, I will tell you this, what a generous, awesome guy. Just totally cool. And what really solidified the night for us was we're in the third row, and about 15 minutes in, he goes, where's JJ? Where's my friend JJ? And I'm like, oh, I'm right here. And he goes, yeah, because JJ and I were talking about my dad, John Astin. And so he's talking to me, but he's, the whole crowd of Fargo Theater. And then 10 minutes later, he goes, oh, and JJ, where are you again? Where are you, JJ? And so he keeps shouting out from me. So finally I go, hey, listen, Sean, no one cares about me. They want to see you tonight, okay? Thanks for the shout outs, big guy. And so I can feel Jill's grip on my knee getting tighter and tighter about Sean Astin. He's calling you out from the stage.
Yep.
And I'm like, yep, I'm honored, right?
Yeah.
It's fun. It's all about the relationship.
That's
so
awesome.
Anyway, so Sean Astin comes to Fargo, but I meet Brent Brandt, and I tell Brent one of my dreams is to bring Stephen Tobolowsky to Fargo, because he's always touring with his books and promoting his podcast, and he seems to like to go on adventures to places. And he goes, it's crazy you say that, because I've been wanting to bring Tobo to town too. I know him from the South Dakota Film Festival. Mm-hmm. And so within 5 days, we had solidified the opportunity to bring Stephen Tobolowsky. And if you don't know who that is, number one, after you finish listening to all of JJ Meets World, listen to the Tobolowsky Files.
Fantastic.
Oh, so good.
Utterly fantastic.
It to me, that's what got me into podcasting.
Yeah.
Because of the way he tells these stories. So good. But he's Ned Ryerson from Groundhog Day. That's probably the role everyone knows him the most from. Needle nose Ned the head. Come on, buddy. I did the whistling belly button trick in high school. I dated your sister Mary Pat until you told me to stop. Got a bad case of the shingles. Almost didn't graduate. Come on, Bing.
That's a really good Tobo impression.
It is a good, right? And and if you listen, I think Making a Classic is the one where is the episode of his podcast where he talks about making Groundhog Day.
Okay.
And he tells some amazing stories. But so he comes to Fargo and he spent a week here.
Yeah.
Because he went to Deadwood and he went to Jamestown, Bismarck.
And you guys got a lot of FaceTime with him.
We did. Yeah, it was great. I was honored. And after his presentation in Fargo, we went out and had guacamole and beer. So that was a ton of fun.
Good combo.
And his wife Anne was here as well, who I've wanted to meet for a long time too, because he talks so much about her. And they keep bees. And so I was like, I'm keeping bees. Let's talk about bees. But it's really cool. That was exciting. That was an exciting thing that's happened in my adult life.
And you've met a bunch of other people. We could probably fill a whole podcast with talking about the crazy encounters with celebrities. Maybe one will come back up as we continue.
Let's talk about me more as a person.
No one wants to hear about that shit.
I am afraid of getting diabetes.
Well,
as we all should be.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
But so I am afraid. So I've lost 50 pounds since we started this podcast.
Because of the podcast, I'd like to think.
Maybe. I can't say one way or the other, but I mean.
Correlation.
Yeah, right?
Right?
Yeah, it fits there. But I'm afraid of getting diabetes. So my mom had type 2 diabetes, which probably, had something to do with alcoholism. And
with diabetes, do you go through each number? So like if you type 2, that means you've progressed from type 1, or is it just a totally different thing?
So my understanding is type 2, it's like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma versus lymphoma. I don't know.
Okay.
So I think type 2 diabetes is just a different type where you don't have to take daily insulin. You just have to monitor your blood sugar.
Got it. Okay.
And do stuff like that. Versus type 1 is where you're taking insulin every single day.
So type 1 is worse, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
That's what I think. If you have diabetes and can shed a more clear light on this, you feel free to contact us.
Well, you know what? I think that leads into the next good topic too, is that, you've always been a somewhat bigger guy, but you are also like the most fast and sprightly big guy I've ever known. Nimble is good. I know one time you ran down a car thief who was breaking into your van. I've seen you do other things too. I mean, you are someone whose personality seems to hide any kind of misgivings you might have about your weight, because you're so big and positive and in personality wise. So I mean, with your weight, which is a struggle. I mean, I'm struggling with weight gain myself. I mean, how do you stay motivated to do that?
So first and foremost, I look at pictures from my senior year of high school when I thought I was hugely fat, and I go, oh my God, what I would kill to be back at like 160. That is just, wouldn't that be great?
Fuck yeah.
I inherited a set of man breasts, which run on my mom's side of the family. And my grandfather only had 4 daughters, so it all makes sense that they have breasts. But he himself had a pair of man boobs, some moobs. And so that's kind of where I trace these. And I started getting man breasts in 7th grade.
Okay.
And so I was never... I would not consider myself a fat kid until like 8th grade. Okay. Because believe it or not, when I was a kid, I was super athletic. I was thin. And then all of a sudden I started to get self-conscious about, the way I looked. And I had other friends who were thinner, and now I'm starting to, pudge out a little bit. And so it's been something that I always think, well, if I can make fun of it and if I can get ahead of it before somebody else can, it'll be better, which is probably why I ended up getting into comedy.
Sure.
So in the Fred Bevel episode of this podcast, I asked him if he thinks all comedians are damaged. And he said, well, no, I think a lot of us are normal. And I was like, oh, okay, because I'm damaged. I am definitely damaged.
Well, and so just because someone isn't damaged doesn't mean they're not working through damage with the comedy.
True, very
right?
true.
I mean, I don't know how it would be possible for someone to have a sense of humor that does not know the opposite of that. I mean, how do you understand a sense of humor or what is funny if you don't have something painful or dark to contrast it with?
Right. So it's without light there cannot be the dark, or
Without dark, there cannot.
that's the one. Yeah. Right.
Sure. I think Abraham Lincoln said that. Something. Yeah.
So it was. I used to from 6th grade until I was 28 years old. I swam with a t-shirt on, using it as a sort of protective shield from the jabs and jeers.
Which is also one of the best Onion headlines
it is
of all
so
time.
good. Fat kid wears shirt at pool. When I saw that, I thought, they are writing an Onion story about my life. This is amazing. So I did that because I didn't want people to see my body and go like, gah. Now, no one had ever done that, but I assume that's what they do. And that's what I think the biggest problem is that overweight people have is they assume that people are going to react with the worst interaction. They're going to look and go, "Gah, gross," or they're going to get like when you smell a fart in a room and you see a fat person there, you blame the fat person.
In elementary
right off the bat.
school, that was the rule. Was like you can always blame a fat kid if you fart.
So, and I'm not telling you that isn't the truth. Maybe 1 out of 10 times.
Yes,
but
we're not saying fat
assuming
kids don't fart.
Right.
But they're just
skinny
humans.
kids fart.
Absolutely.
And skinny kids are probably eating more vegetables.
And their metabolism is going crazy. And
they're
doing crazy
creating
stuff.
gas.
One thing that I've definitely struggled with since I've put on the weight is like if I know I'm about to go into, say, a social situation where the people who I'm going to see haven't seen me since I was skinny. And so the idea of what's going to go on their head when they go, oh, he really let himself go, right? This the same thing that I say to myself in the morning every time. I'm, for whatever reason, just paralyzed at the thought that other people would have that thought. And then it just colors everything. It's just such a downer on your own sense of self-worth sometimes, at least for me.
And I think what's unfortunate is you're not giving these people the benefit of the doubt, right? You're assuming that the first thing they're going to say is, God, Tucker really let himself go. Instead of, Tucker, I haven't seen you in so long. I'm so happy to see you.
And now you're more huggable.
Yeah, exactly. Be like, I could barely get my arms around you. So I find that, my self-esteem was so far down, and I just gradually put on more and more weight over the years. So it's not like I had 2 bad years and I suddenly gained, 150 pounds. But at my heaviest, I was 330 pounds, man. And I got to the point of where I thought, okay, so my dad's dad, my grandfather, died at 50. My dad died at 51.
And your dad was a skinny guy.
He was a skinny guy. My dad and my sister have a metabolism where they could eat a large pizza a piece and lose 2 pounds. It pisses me off. I have my mother's metabolism as well as my mother's hips. And here's the thing. I'm a big guy, but I'm not big in areas where you need it. Like, I have no ass. It's almost like it, caves in a little bit. So pants never sit right on me. They always want to fall off a little bit.
And you hate wearing a belt because your belly hangs over the buckle and it's uncomfortable.
And it rides on it and pinches.
And when, now that there's this whole thing where if you're a dude, you can buy dude pants that are stretchy but don't look like they're stretchy. And that's both a blessing and a curse. Because now you're just giving us more reasons to get even fatter.
Yeah. Hey, shout out to the Goodfellow brand that's exclusive to Target, I believe. They've really mastered that slight, because it's not like the whole thing is elastic. There's just like 2 elastic pockets that allow it to stretch, and you go like, hell yeah, I'm a 36.
What's that brand called?
Goodfellow.
Goodfellow, if you're out there, there's a podcast run by 2 fatties that would totally love some sponsorship, and you can pay us in pants.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Pants are like the fucking kryptonite for a fat person.
Oh, yeah.
They're like the worst part of the day. Like, oh, God, I got to put these goddamn things on.
So when I started my weight loss, I was wearing a 42, but it was like a and then you just the double reinforced button. Like I was not using a button. I was using the stud button.
Yeah.
Now I'm down to like my 38s are a little loose now. So I think I'm down to
Nice,
36.
dude. You're down to a 36?
Yeah.
You wear a smaller waist than I do.
So, but look at how my like stomach sits, right? So
I see what
my
you're saying.
waist is tiny, and then I've got that barrel chest
Got it.
on top of it.
I'm much more of a pear in that it sort of tapers outward, around the hip area. And yeah, wearing pants is not the funnest all the time.
But I went from a double XL shirt to I'm an XL now. My
Good for
problem,
you.
though, is that I need to wear a tall because I'm all torso.
Yeah.
Got a big torso here. I'm 6'3".
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is so. Going back to the dealing with weight loss and being a bigger person, I had to learn to like love myself, right? And I've been together now with my girlfriend for over 12 years, and never once has she ever said, "You need to lose some weight. You need to really get this thing on track." And that has made a big difference. I've found people to tell me like, "God, you're so funny. You're so awesome." And I've had people who tell me that they look up to me in different ways. And I realize, well, they're not looking up to me because I'm skinny. They look up to me because I'm a genuine human being.
Yeah.
And that to me is more important. And so some of the thinnest, most Adonis-y people I know are the biggest dicks.
Yeah. Because
And-
they've skated by off of this notion that they're beautiful, so they don't have to do anything.
Right. And they're the people who are going, "Gugh," when they look at somebody else. And I think, well, you're empty. You're empty inside. Have you ever seen the movie Happiness?
Oh, yes.
So the very beginning of the movie Happiness starts off with John Lovitz, and he's starting to he's got tears welling up in his eyes, and he doesn't understand.
Just got dumped, I think.
Yeah,
right?
So he is on a date where the girl has told him, like, "Listen, I'm just not into you," and he doesn't really understand why. And he's like, "Is it because of my looks?" And she's like, "Oh no, it's just I'm kind of going through this thing," and so he's just, you can tell he's sad. He thought this was gonna be the one, and so he gives her a present. He goes, "Well, I got this for you," and she's like, "Oh, look at this! It's it's an ashtray, and it's engraved, and it's from this antique collection." She's like, "Oh wow!" And he's excited about telling her, and she's like, "Oh, thank you so much. I'm gonna treasure this forever." And then all of a sudden he turns and goes, "No, you won't." He goes, "No, you won't. This is for a woman who can see beyond my looks, to see that I'm a genuine human being and I'm good." He goes, "Because you're shit, but me, baby, I'm champagne." John Lovitz is underrated in my book.
Oh, absolutely.
And this wasn't him just being his goofy, acting self. He crushes, and he's only in that movie for maybe 3 minutes.
Yep.
And he left a huge impact. By the way, the movie Philip Seymour Hoffman is in it.
So I'm trying to remember the name of the filmmaker. He did Happiness. He did Palindromes.
Yep.
Blanking on the name. I'm sure a lot of you listening are yelling at Todd Solondz.
Yes.
Todd Solondz. His
favorite of previous of Greg Carlson.
Yeah, absolutely, and a favorite of mine and a lot of film buffs, because he specifically makes a kind of movie that is so uncomfortable to watch, and that's sort of the calling card of his stuff. He really crosses a lot of people's taboo lines and uses material because it seems like the goal is to make you squirm, and he does that successfully. But if you know that's what you're going into, that's what you're looking for, you're gonna love it. So I love that stuff.
There's a certain amount of, even though these things are sort of fantastic when you're watching some of the things of his movies, they do feel real.
Oh, absolutely.
It feels like that's a conversation you've had before in some way or shape or form, or your friend has told you that they had with a girl they were on a date with.
If anything, they're really good at reminding you that no, this movie is not what's perverse. Reality is perverse because these people exist. This happens.
You know what I would say is this. When you hear about a friend of yours was recently arrested and they found, it turns out they had been peeping
Okay.
And they have all these like photos on their cell phone of like them peeping on their neighbors.
So to be clear, I have no friends that I know have done this.
But let's say that happens, and then your first thought is like, he's like, I'm not 100% surprised. Like, I can't believe this happened, but I'm not. It doesn't shock me because it makes sense that if I were to have a friend who was arrested for this, it'd be this. That is what his movies are full of, are those people who, if you interacted with them in everyday life and then found out that
You would steer clear.
they were, touching themselves and dialing women out of the phone book randomly and throwing a postcard over whatever comes out, then you'd go, oh, yeah, it totally makes sense that Todd or Mike or, Bernie would have done that.
Yeah.
I just ruined a part of happiness, but
That's
don't worry.
fine.
It's all
That's
good.
pretty early on, too.
Yeah.
It's fairly early on. Definitely make sure you watch the movie Happiness with either your mom or your grandma. Absolutely. That's the best audience for it.
Or maybe you're on a youth trip somewhere and there's a VHS player on the bus.
I'd love it if that accidentally got put into rotation on an airplane,
Yeah.
in the in-show flight.
How do movies on planes get chosen? Because, do they avoid all plane crash related movies?
No, but maybe, but they do edit them.
Like if there's a plane crash?
I'm guessing, but there is a shot that they cut early in Captain America Civil War because I watched that on a plane. So my previous job, I traveled a lot, flew a lot. I've flown hundreds of times, but during the job, for whatever reason, I sort of gained an anxiety about flying and ended up getting some Xanax, and I was able to work through it, no problem. It was just totally sort of weird. But this was in the middle of one of those moments, and so I was looking to distract myself. I almost never watch an in-flight movie, but they had the monitors in the backs of the TVs. You could pick movies, and Captain America Civil War was on there. Great. And in the battle scene at the airport, they cut out one thing, and it's when War Machine accidentally gets his power taken away, and he falls to the ground and hits the ground.
Oh, yeah.
They cut it like 3 seconds before he even hit.
Really?
Yeah, for some reason, that one thing had to be taken out. They didn't take out anything else that was going on in that movie. Any of the other violence. Of course, they're destroying an airplane on the field when they're fighting, but doesn't really matter. But that moment, for some reason, they're like, no, we cannot show this character coming into contact with the ground. We can show, they couldn't take the whole scene out because it's integral to the movie. But anyways, I digress.
That's weird because, he doesn't walk away from it, but he survives the crash.
He survives it, but I guess that just would have ruined someone's flight, in their opinion.
You ever talk to someone who is angry that you've used the word like, oh, there was an accident on the way here, someone had an accident on the road.
Why would someone be mad about that?
It's crash.
Oh, really? Who in your life is doing that and remove them immediately?
So many people, and it's like recently. I said, was there like a gentleman's GQ article I missed that everyone's all up in arms about?
Saying accident is so 2017.
They're like, well, it wasn't an accident; it was a crash.
Did it happen on purpose? No, then it was an accident.
Right. Or it's just you're using a term, right?
Yeah.
You're just using a term to describe what it was. We know what it was. You don't have to tell me like one car collided with another car, causing the cars to change the direction that they were traveling.
Next time that happens to you, accuse that person of being accident phobic.
I will. I like that.
We're going to get back onto the topic of JJ here. You have been a performer since high school. Mm-hmm. You did theater. You did improv. You took classes at Trollwood. Mm-hmm. Why do you think you gravitated towards that, and how would you say that's helped you in your life?
So I took an intro to theater course in ninth grade, and the lowest time of my life was 6th and 7th grade. 8th grade was nothing special either. And I think I took that because I was never good at art.
Okay.
And so I didn't want to take, painting or sculpture or whatever was being offered as another art class. And so I thought, well, I'll take drama instead because I love movies. So maybe I'll figure out something there. And then I had a teacher by the name of John Marks. And John had a classroom unlike anything else I had ever experienced. It was a classroom where you were given freedom. And I don't mean freedom to do whatever you want. You were given freedom to choose how you were going to learn and how you were going to absorb. If you really wanted to learn about Shakespeare, you could do a Shakespeare monologue. If you really wanted to do something that says like, gosh, I hate the fact that parents and adults won't listen to kids, you could seek out a way to present that on stage. And he was the first educator I ever had who treated me as not as an equal, but as took
you seriously.
Yeah. And that changed me. And he said, listen, you need to go watch, you love Saturday Night Live. You need to go watch Confetti. It's the Fargo South end of the year variety show. Their theater is under construction right now, so they're doing it here at Discovery. It's tonight and tomorrow. And I went and I saw Confetti, which was a live version on stage of Saturday Night Live.
Gotcha.
And I thought, oh my God. And then I found out that these people were writing their own skits. Oh my God. And so John said, well, I think that you should sign up for theater next year. And it's a full year-long class. You're going to love it. So I signed up for theater, and the theater was still under construction. So we actually had class in the storage area behind the bleachers of our high school. So the classroom itself was probably like 7 feet wide. It's where they used to keep all like the basketballs and shit.
Okay.
And Gwen Stark was the teacher, and Gwen had a different classroom than John did, whereas John it was a little more hippie like, and Gwen's was more like a college course.
Okay.
Where you still had freedom, but you also had the freedom to succeed or fail based on whether or not you were going to work for it.
Got it.
So it put you in the driver's seat of having to kind of control your own destiny. And I had a blast. I had so much fun. And I started to meet the people who were doing these things. I said, oh my God, there are people like me who are kind of silly and goofy and have these weird ideas that, are funny to me and maybe not anyone else, but they're sharing their ideas. So maybe I'll share my ideas. And something clicked and I found my people. So I don't know if anyone else has ever had a moment where you didn't know what your tribe was.
Oh, yeah.
And my sophomore year of high school, I found my tribe, and it forever changed my life. So much so that I'm still good friends with Gwen Stark. I will gladly, if I see John Marks from across a room, I will immediately go over and give him a hug and remind him, thank you so much for, allowing me to succeed in something. And then at the end of my sophomore year, I did a play, the first play I was ever in. It was a Woody Allen play. It's in it's in an anthology he has called Without Feathers, but I played it was about there's like a murderer on the loose in like an area of New York, and a bunch of the residents decide they're going to put together like a posse and get this murderer. And Tim Larson played the lead, and it was done in a minimalist style. And I played the head of this group that was going to get we're recruiting. And so they recruit Tim Larson's character. It was a weird play. It was goofy, but it was a ton of fun. And I didn't realize, I was like, you get like a family. You're a part of a team. I was never going to be a part of a sports team. And so now I was part of a team. So I have a blast doing that play. And then Phil Lund, who we mentioned earlier, the sweaty guy, said, you should audition for the improv troupe. I think you'd be good at it. And I said, no. I could never do what they do. He says, no, you should audition. And so I auditioned for the improv troupe and made it. And my junior and senior year, I soaked up all the improv I could. I was in every single show that they offered. I learned technical theater skills, and I got an opportunity to repay the gift I was given of having someone take an interest in you by doing that for other people.
Yeah.
And so the underclassmen and say, gosh, you guys can do this. Try this. This will be fun. Here's an opportunity for you to perform in this way. And that, I think, that's what my calling is.
Sure.
Is finding out what someone's talent is and trying to help them succeed in their personal goal.
There's a business owner that I know personally. He runs a farm implement dealership. And one time he told me, anytime he's met someone looking for a job who was either a theater major or just someone who had done a lot of theater, he would try to hire them. Because in his opinion and his experience, people who put on theater are incredibly hardworking. What kind of non-theatrical, or should I say non-performative skills do you think being a theater kid gave you?
Theater kids know how to build is one thing, because you're building sets all the time.
Oh, yeah.
So they know their way around a hammer and a drill, a 2x4. So I think it quickly they can pick up those abilities to build things, and they're the folks who remodel their homes a little bit. Theater, I think, gives you an eye for aesthetics and finding a balance and functionality to things. So you take like a David and Carrie Winterstein from Theater B. Whenever they remodel a section of their home,
Yeah.
I am just in awe because they've got such an eye for those things, and it probably has been influenced from years and years and years of set design.
Sure. I mean, David's been our basically ad hoc technical director at Theater B.
Yeah.
Just because he's got the skill set. He's amazing at it, and amongst his other talents that he's got.
Communication is another thing too.
Oh, yeah.
So somebody who's in theater craves the spotlight a little bit and craves attention. And so that's the person where when they give a presentation, they shine.
Mm-hmm.
They shine when they can be in front of a group of people. I think that there's probably a certain aspect of you need to be a little bit off to love theater, because you give your all for something that disappears. So when an architect gives his all, he designs a building that could stand for 100 years. But no matter what, when you're doing theater, it's gone.
Yeah.
It's gone at the end of the night. And the best you can hope for is that you left an impression on somebody. In the Rich Summer podcast that we have, Rich talks about a performance of Equus that he saw that still to this day brings up a deep emotional response in him. And so I think that is something there. I also think people who are in theater know what it's like to work with a deadline, because the show's going to go on.
We've been advertising the day everyone's going to come see this.
Exactly. So I think they're less likely to be the person of like, I just need one more week, or this isn't ready. They can just kind of make it happen. Now, that being said, sometimes a performer is not a good person to have in your business, because I don't think someone who has a heavy theatrical background can always be the best leader, because delivering difficult news can be difficult for them, because their drive in theater is to have people like them, right? And you want people to leave, even if you're the villain in a play, you want people to like your performance. And so having to be the heavy can be, I think, a little tough.
You get a lot of teamwork skills too.
Yeah.
Out of it, I mean, obviously team sports do that really great, but it's basically essentially the same thing in that there's a goal that you have to get to as a group. That I definitely learned a lot of teamwork skills from being in theater.
And you know what is here? So let's say you're on the football team, right? So you're on the football team and you interact with your coach and the other players on your team, maybe the cheerleaders. And so you think that's what the football team is. But let's go a step further. There's someone who is announcing the game. There was someone who's running the scoreboard, and there's somebody who striped the field before you got out there, and there's somebody who's, in the crowd watching you, cheering you on. In theater, all of those people are working together.
Mm-hmm.
So I know the technicians who are running the lights, and they're doing their part so that I can do my part, and reinforcing those things back and forth. There was a director, and there was someone who was making costumes, and so I think that while it is very similar in a teamwork fashion to a football team or a baseball team, it goes one step further, and you can see more, you're taking more in from the sides.
Yeah.
For that. And so that's why I think you're even better as a team member, because you're not only thinking about the people who are directly in your finance department, you're saying like, well, gosh, what we do affects how HR is going to do this. And what HR does, affects how corporate is going to bring something in.
Well, so when we were
I
talking,
speak a lot about that. I do a lot of corporate speaking.
Okay.
Bring that into it.
Got it. Well, if you'd like to hire JJ, just email jjmeetsworldpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll delete it so I don't have to lose more of his time.
I was going to say, you're not going to get a cut, just so you know.
No,
Tucker.
I know. I just don't want you. I just want to have you all to myself, JJ. That's all I
appreciate
want.
that.
When we were talking about high school, you mentioned improv, and I want to get into this in two parts. One, I want to talk about the improv troupe at Fargo South, which is the longest running improv troupe in the area. And then I'd like to talk about how you sort of transition from being a student into eventually owning and operating Line Benders. But let's start with Donkey Hotey's.
Yep. Donkey Hotey's Improvcicles, which was a very long name because they got to Donkey Hotey's and then Improvcicles, and they finally were like, screw it, we'll just call it Donkey Hotey's Improvcicles. Formed in, I think in 99 was when they allowed them to start having a club. And they had to practice and rehearse for 6 months before the administration would let them have a show. And then all of the administration showed up, and it was, we're going to have our finger on the button. So if any of you step out of line, this whole thing is shut down. So they knew that they had to maintain a level of appropriateness and I don't blame the administration on that, because that's a terrifying concept to think of, like, okay, I'll just let some high school kids go up there and say whatever they want to say in front of a group of people who know they can say whatever it is they want to say. So I have to give major props to the administration from Fargo South High, because they took a huge risk by allowing Don Quixotes to exist and then to give them an opportunity to perform. And same thing for Gwen Stark and all of those kids who were around there the first year. So then in 2000, it must have been 98. It must have started in 98. So Don Quixote starts, and it, after like 2 years, becomes so huge that 40, 50, 60 people are showing up to every rehearsal, and they're watching mini shows of these kids working with improv games. Now, here's something that's wholly unique about Don Quixote's. It was 100% student run.
Yeah.
There wasn't a teacher there who said, "Oh, I've got a background in improv."
Who were the students that started it?
Sean Dillon, Seth Haryu. They were big movers and shakers at the beginning. Tanner Dolan, Tim Larson. There's a good group of people who really helped this thing move along throughout the years. And at one point, I was lucky enough to be, they had the kids who were helping run it. And I had no idea what I was doing. And at that time, there were maybe 2 books on improv that you could get. Mm-hmm. And one was Impro by Keith Johnstone, and the other one was Truth and Comedy. And some of the pages you'd read, and you go like, what the hell are these people talking about? I don't understand what these concepts are. Because I was a junior in high school, never having seen improv outside of high school, with the exception of Whose Line Is It Anyway? And that's what we were doing, was short form improv. So at least you could look at Whose Line and think, God, I wish we could have someone play the piano. So I was in it my junior and senior year, and I find improv to be one of the purest art forms and purest forms of theater you can find, because you're reacting.
No set. There's no costumes almost ever.
Yep.
Maybe some props for a particular game. But yeah, I mean, there's no script, like you said. There's rehearsal, but not the kind of rehearsal you would assume.
It's just like when a football team practices. You're going through the motions of these particular games so that you can learn the mechanic of the game and the skills of never saying no and trying to, propel a scene forward. And so you've got to practice that, but it's not like I'm practicing a routine that then I'm going to turn around and, okay, she said penguin. Okay, this is perfect because now I can do that bit where it's a tuxedo. And I did a dozen shows in high school. And what was amazing is we were performing for 500-600 people at a time. One of my happiest moments was when we did the North High South High show, because North High started a troupe a few years later.
Yep.
And your dad, I believe, was really the one who pushed North High and South High to perform together in a duo show.
Okay, I didn't know that part. I know that when Travis Simon and Andrea Enert started Julius Seizures, which was voted on, I wish I knew what the other names were. I can't remember.
Wasn't Poke My Hauntus one of them?
That was what Natalie Deutsch wanted to push, but who knows?
She tried to push that in Trollwood too. All these different places.
And the North administration said if because I met these guys doing theater my sophomore year, which was then the first year that improv started at North, and the administration there said you can have a club, but you need to have an adult supervisor who's basically watching you guys at rehearsals, because you're rehearsing in a not totally sanctioned thing on property after school in the theater. And there was they wanted there to be some sort of adult who was responsible, but Dad ended up being the perfect person for it, because he didn't step in, he didn't try to change anything. He just made sure we didn't burn the place down.
Right.
And Fargo North being a much smaller school than Fargo South, and you guys having had Donkey Hoteys for a number of years, we had just a much tinier and much less experienced improv troupe. But that show was a ton of fun.
It was. And we played the wah, 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 wah from The Good, Bad, and the Ugly at the beginning, and it looked like we were going to come out and be at each other's throats, and it looked like it was going to be a competition.
Yeah.
And then we busted into Why Can't We Be Friends?
Yeah.
And that was what I thought was really neat, is that it wasn't, I hate when people turn improv into a competition.
Yeah.
And so
art as competition takes a lot of the fun out of it.
There are people who think, oh, I saw comedy sports, and so I'm going to do a comedy sports thing where it's my team versus this team. Well, you don't understand is those people all work for comedy sports, and they just were given the red shirt tonight, not the blue shirt.
And a lot of us knew each other already through Trollwood and other things, because Fargo's not that big of a town. So.
And hey, shout out, Andrea Enert's got a pretty awesome podcast, I understand, about video games or something.
I'm gonna look up the name of it. It's something Wii Games. So
I'll keep going while you look at that. So I graduate from high school, and my plan is to move to Chicago because I want to study at the Second City, which is the comedy mecca. It is where, Chris Farley and John Belushi and I'm not even going to bother naming names because it's everybody. John Candy, Dan Aykroyd, all of these people who I looked up to and see as comedy gods, where they all started. And so I was like, I got to go to Chicago. I'm going to go to Columbia College and get my film degree while I'm working, working shopping at Second City. And that summer I directed a play in Rutland, North Dakota. I got a call from a small town in North Dakota that said, we'll pay you $1,000 and give you a house for 3 weeks to direct a play. And
more on that, tune into the podcast with Shelley Fink.
Yeah, that's right. And, it's 3 weeks long, and 5 days into it, I got a call and found out that my dad had cancer. And so when I was done with Rutland, I had a week before I was moving to Chicago. I mean, that's how close we were. And when I found out that it was tongue cancer, and there was not a good prognosis, and I made a decision I was going to stay back in Fargo. And the hardest part of that whole thing for me was my dad wanted me to leave really bad. He said, you gotta go to Chicago. This is what you want to do. And my dad and I didn't see eye to eye. He liked sports and he liked business and he liked, things like I don't give a shit about the stuff he likes and he doesn't care about the things I like. But he was a really good dad in the fact that he still came out to my improv shows. Not all of them, but he came out to my improv shows. And he knew that this is what I wanted. And he knew that Fargo at that time couldn't give me what I needed. So he said, I want you to go. And I said, no, I'm not going to, which I'm so glad I did because it was, that would have been August. By April, my dad passed. So I'm glad I stayed here just because that's sometimes what you got to do. Yeah. And that was the right decision for me. Everyone is different. Everyone makes their own decision when something like that happens. But so my first thought was like, well, now what am I going to do? Because there's no improv in my life. Now I knew that a improv troupe had started there. It was called Line Benders, and they had been doing some stuff for about a year, and they didn't need any other people. And so I thought, well, God, what am I going to do? So a couple friends and I started a show called Caffeine Free that raised money for the Federation of Families. And it was a chance for us to do a long form improv show and just kind of be silly and goofy and do some stuff. You would think that we were doing a Disney show. We took it so seriously, but Bill Lucas, your dad, who at this point was running Line Benders, saw it and said, listen, I'm going to give you guys a shot if you want to join Line Benders. And so I joined Line Benders in 2003, and your dad made me rehearse for 6 full months before I got to do a show.
Wow.
And my first show with Line Benders was a post-prom in Findlay, North Dakota. And I'll remember it for 2 reasons. Number one, we stayed at a bed and breakfast, and when we got there, we knocked on the door, and this old woman answered. We're like, oh, hello, you must be Beth. And she goes, no. And we said, oh, well, is Beth here? She's like, Beth is my mother. And she's in the hospital right now, but I'll take care of you. And I was like, holy God, how old is this woman's mother? She's got to be 90 herself. Is Beth 105? So we stay in this room where we stayed in the attic, and you used a twisty staircase to get up to the attic, which was, as Fred Bevel also says in another one, just a series of twin beds. Mm-hmm. So there's maybe like 7 or 8 twin beds. And I remember that night watching Saturday Night Live really, really late, and Dustin Buchanan and I laughing because I said, well, what would happen if I had a heart attack right now? And like, what would Bill have to do? And then when it finally went up to bed, Davey was farting every 5 minutes, and he would fart, and we'd start to laugh and fart, and then your dad would say, God damn it, go to sleep, because we didn't care. He was the one driving home because we could stay up all night. And I'll never forget, I wore a turtleneck sweater in my first Line Benders improv show that had it was green, it was forest green, and it had a thick white stripe on the side that had the American Red Cross symbol on it for whatever reason. It looked like something someone should wear at a ski lodge. Yep. And I remember getting a laugh in the first scene from a group of strangers who I had never met before, didn't have any invested interest in me, weren't laughing because it was something funny JJ was doing. It was something funny this stranger was doing, and I was hooked. I said, this, I want to do this. I have got to do this. And so within a couple of years, your dad decided to sell the company. And so I bought the company for $1 and then 5% of our profit from that year. And after that, we had an agent for a while that eventually I fired. And
so you do all your own booking yourself, right?
Yep, we do all our own booking. It allows us to do 2 things. Number one, there's no middleman.
Yep, save the commission money too.
Yep, so I can pass that saving on to the customer, which is great, because a lot of people will call and say, when they call Line Benders, they're taking a risk.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the people in the tri-state area are saying, well, we're going to have a comedy troupe come in. Usually what we do is we have a raffle and someone gives a speech and we have prime rib. But we want to have entertainment. But most people have not seen improv. So this is a risk for them. So I fully understand that this, they don't want to have a year of like, way to go, Dan. So it's really important to me that we give a product that is awesome. Has every single show been awesome? No. And if you ever consider booking entertainment for your holiday party, whether it's line benders or something else, I'm going to give you 3 things you need to know right off the bat. Number 1, know what your budget is and be open and honest about your budget. If you think that you're going to get a cheaper price from having them quote you out, you're not. This is a professional. They know what their time is worth, and you just need to be open and honest about what you want to pay for it. I have never had someone say, well, my budget is $8,000. And I go, oh, great, because we cost $8,000.
Yeah.
I usually say, fantastic. This is how much we charge.
Yep.
And then sometimes they'll go, oh, well, I've got $8,000. I said, for $8,000, you could actually buy a comedian that's been on television before.
Sure.
Number 2, the venue is one of the most important things. And let this person
I would put that actually at number 1 almost, just because bad venue kills so many shows.
So many. And because venue deals with sound. And if you think, oh, well, don't worry because they have karaoke there, that is apples and oranges different. If if you've rented out the side room of a bar, but they're unwilling to turn off their televisions or jukebox, it's going to...
Or there's a band playing next door.
Or there's a band. And if you've rented out a room at a hotel, one of the things I do when I get booked is I call the hotel and say, hey, what else is going on? Oh, you've got a wedding that's going, with a DJ that's going to be going the same time we are? Well, that's not going to work. Not at all.
Mm-hmm. How do you work around that then if you've booked the client and then... You're booked now, and the hotel is going to be like, well, I don't care. I mean, you do whatever you want, but this wedding is already booked with a DJ and stuff.
So hotels are really great. So because their bread and butter is, this is going to, what's the nice way of saying this? A wedding happens once, or so people hope, right? But if you get in good with that corporation, maybe they'll have 20 Christmas parties there over the years. So what I'll do is I'll say this, like, listen, okay, let's say we have adjoining rooms and there's just one of those dividers down the middle. And their plan is to have the DJ next to the divider with a dance floor there. And then on the opposite side is going to be our stage. Well, we'll make a deal where they send the DJ to the far opposite side and maybe have their speakers point away. And then they put us on the opposite side.
Got it.
Or they'll say, okay, talk to our tech person and maybe you can patch into our sound system with a headset piece. So, because they want it to be as successful.
Sure.
As possible.
Got it.
And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you get someone who just doesn't care and maybe they're on their way out and it doesn't happen. But venue is very important. And so being able to put them in contact with the venue if they have questions or figuring out what's going to happen, it helps me decide if I'm going to bring a stage, if I'm going to bring a mic, anything like that. And then the third thing, the most important thing is let the people know what's happening. I can't tell you that there's ever been a time where it's worked out where someone has said, okay, we'll just go up. Well, do they know that there's an improv show? Well, no, it's going to be a surprise. Well, people need to kind of gear up for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because maybe they think, well, I'm just going to spend my night socializing.
Yeah.
You can't socialize if you bring in a comedian.
If a comedy show suddenly breaks out.
Right. And then the worst thing is those people then now think, well, I'll just be kind and I'll take it to the back of the room. Well, then all of a sudden you get this din from the back of the room that's spilling over.
Yeah.
And so with those 3 things, you can help your show be successful. You're paying for this thing, right? So why not get the benefit of the years of expertise that some of these people had? I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of road comics, and road comics are great because they can tell you what every American Legion setup is like. They can tell you exactly who's got the good in-house mic and who has a bad. The number of places I've been in who have just a crappy wireless microphone. We travel with our own most of the time just because I'll get in there and hear be like, That's fine when you're saying B15.
Yep.
But it's not fine when you're trying to entertain people
Exactly.
and grab the nuance of a really good joke about, a dad and a daughter going to prom.
Do you remember your first bad show?
Oh,
like just
yeah.
truly bad.
Yeah, I do.
Let's hear it.
So, probably like my first show with Line Benders was 6 months. This is probably like 7 or 8 months into it.
Okay.
And all the new people who had started, Jason Jacobson was one of them, Phil Lund, and I can't remember who else was
Dustin?
there.
Or Dustin was already in it.
Dustin was
he was
already
in it before Dad owned it.
Yeah. Anyway, there was somebody else. We were doing a post-prom in Warren, Minnesota. And a man named Randy Long, who owns an entertainment company in Fargo.
Randy Red Shoes.
Your dad had hired or gave Randy $100 to watch us just to make sure that everything went all right. And it was because none of us had ever talked to a client before. None of us had ever figured out, like, okay, well, what's the staging aspect? So he was setting him sort of as a producer for us. Of course, we thought, like, oh, God, we're going to have a producer? That's stupid. So we go to Warren, Minnesota, and the post-prom is being held in a bowling alley.
So just so I can be clear, so Dad was not with you.
He was not. They had another gig in another city.
So he really was like your chaperone.
Right. And rather than saying, I'm going to take half of my veterans and then mix them with half of the newbies and then vice versa, just decided not to do that, which I found to be really
You wanted
silly.
all the vets with him. You
Right.
didn't want to be embarrassed that night.
So their theme for their post-prom is like tropical locale. So they've got 4 blenders making smoothies, and there's a big buck hunter game, and then there's bowling. Well, there's nowhere for us to perform. So they said, well, you're going to be performing in the bowling alley, like by the ball return. So we're doing sets where we're having to step over the ball return for this thing. And nothing's going right because the kids they wouldn't let them sit down in that area. They were sitting beyond where the racks of balls were. And then they're still making smoothies the whole time. And they're still like, you big buck hunter. Click, 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 click. And it was just a perfect storm of nothing went right. It was the longest 60 minutes of my entire life.
60-minute show. Lame.
Yeah. So we get into the car and we're driving home. And after about and Warren is northern North Dakota. In fact, Warren is home to one of, I think, the last drive-in movie theaters in our region, Skyview. It's awesome.
Does it still exist?
Still exists. Still
Really?
showing movies.
Huh. Interesting.
It's really worth it because now that you tune it into your radio,
Yeah.
so it's pretty neat.
Huh.
And the popcorn is out of this world. Real butter. So we get about 20 miles down the interstate, and Randy goes, JJ, pull over. And so I pull over in Grand Forks. And he goes, listen, I want everyone to go in. I want everyone to get a pop or some candy, something you like. I want you to get a dirty magazine. They're like, what? And he goes, yep, just grab a dirty magazine. And so he goes, and find a weird one. Find the weirdest one you can find. So we go in there and we get a dirty magazine. I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was like we were giggling so hard just buying it. And so we're in the car, and then Randy offers to drive. And so we're passing it around from seat to seat, and we're laughing. And he goes, you guys got to remember this moment. He goes, it's over. Everyone has a show that doesn't work out the way they want. He goes, was it because you guys were bad? No. Was it because you guys panicked in the middle, and then you just, they could see you trying so hard? Because at this point we didn't know what that was like to go to the bar and try hard to pick up a girl and not have it work out.
How old were you at this time?
I was 19.
So you're out of high school.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he goes, it just didn't work out. The show just didn't work out. And so that became a tradition with us newbies. Whenever we had a really bad show, we'd pull over and we'd pick up a dirty magazine.
That's great.
And I am happy to say it's been over a decade since we've picked up a dirty magazine.
Good. Awesome. Well, do you have any idea of how many shows you've done?
I tried to count. It's well over 1,000.
Okay.
So when you think the average show length is like 70 minutes, like it's a lot of time.
Over 1,000 hours of improv time on stage.
What's-
And I've seen you guys a couple of times, and I know it might sound like bullshit because we're friends, but you guys are fantastic.
Thank you.
And every time I see you, you're better than the time before. And so what is it? What sort of a regimen do you have to put your improvers through to get them to that point? Like, what do they have to do in rehearsal and in preparation to be that good?
It's a good question. So I really lucked out with the people who are in line benders are naturally funny people, and they learn from each other. They learn from the people who've been doing this for a while and have, those natural crowd reading skills. Mm-hmm. And so they can follow along with that. So the hardest part is being new to the group and having to just beat the high school out of you. Is I'm saying something funny and people are going to laugh because they know me and they think this is going to be funny. I think that is the hardest thing for them to learn. And then right now we're in a weird spot where we all have varying degrees of tutelage. We have somebody who was with Dudley Riggs for 5 years and Brave New Workshop skills. And we have myself, who has a Second City background, and someone who has a Groundlings and UCB background, and some people who've never seen an improv show outside of Fargo, North Dakota. And so trying to homogenize all those different types. But for example, this summer, there's 13 weeks this summer, and we're taking the Upright Citizens Brigade comedy manual chapter by chapter. There's 13 chapters. And so by the end of the summer, we'll have done, as a group, we'll have worked through every exercise in this 250 plus page book. I think it's really important that people see improv, because seeing a bad improv show or a sophomoric improv show will teach you a lot more about your staging. And when you're like, God, I couldn't hear a single thing that person said because they're constantly upstaging themselves. Mm-hmm. Oh, think about that for your next show. You don't want to be like that kid that you saw. I will say this though, improv right now is more satirized than it's ever been before. There's 1,000 books about improv. You can watch videos online.
Every college is going to have its own improv troupe.
Yep. And Minneapolis has a huge improv community. In fact, they call it the Huge Theater. That is amazing. They just started a sketch comedy theater as well. And no longer do you have to be only in Chicago or LA to be able to have an improv troupe that can be doing great things and going to festivals and impressing people. So I'm really, really lucky and fortunate that we call Fargo our home. And I will tell you this much. It feels so good because these people have worked so hard over the years that they're now getting the recognition that I think they truly deserve, which is people have heard the name Linebenders and they respect it. We did a private show just yesterday for some pretty heavy hitters in the business world. As a private show for a birthday party. And when we do a guessing game, we send someone out into the hall and we send an audience member with them to make sure they're not listening to what's going on in the room. And both times they went out with an audience member, the person said, God, you guys performed at this corporate function we did last year, and you're so funny and you're so talented. I can't believe this. And that makes me feel so good.
This is also how you found out some of the inside baseball on how soon an Applebee's waiter is supposed to fill your drink.
That's right.
Right?
That is.
That's the kind of inroads that being an improviser, professional improver gets you. I want to switch gears a little bit here before we wrap it up for tonight and talk about the sort of new chapter of your career that you've entered into the past couple of years, which is radio.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, because I've known you for so long and I've known how great of an entertainer you are and your ability to be on when you need to, I was like, well, I got to podcast with this guy at some point. But before we started this podcast, you've been doing radio for 2-3 years. How long?
A little over 3 years now.
How did that start? And I guess the follow-up question then to that would be, do you see that as being a part of your life for a long period of time?
Britta Nelson, who's on, what was that, episode 3? 4.
Our most downloaded episode, Girl Rush, number 4.
Currently most downloaded. Britta had worked for a radio operation in Fargo for 5 or 6 years, and their rock station needed a new female co-host for their morning show. So Tank McNamara, Scotch, and Lucy at that time, and it had previously been Ginger. The female had left. Lucy had left. And Scotch, of course, has been a radio icon in Fargo since the early 90s.
Episode 1 of JJ Meets the World is Scotch.
Amazing guy. He's got a ton of stories, and he's worked with everybody in the radio world, and everyone likes him. That's the thing that's amazing. Everyone likes him.
Such a good guy.
And then Tank McNamara, who was a sports guy who just also liked to do a funny morning show. One of the funniest guys I've ever met. Wears one of those dopey fishing hats around to keep the sun out of his face like a baby would. Who also, in a weird, I found out, was good friends with my girlfriend's brother when they were growing up. And he threw up on their couch once. And so that's the story that gets traded about. His mom and Jill's mom go to church together. So Britta gets placed on that morning show, and she's there for, like a year, and they need a sub for someone's taking a vacation. So they call me and they say, would you like to substitute host for a week? Well, God, yeah, that sounds like a great time. I get to go on the radio and make jokes. Sounds great. And so I subbed in, and then a month later they asked me, like, listen, this person's going on vacation now. Would you like to sub in? And I said, sure. So I subbed in again, and I had a blast again. It was awful having to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and get my butt down to the studio, but I did it. So, and then they started having me do character work for them. So I did a character who was this Indian doctor who was obsessed with Bigfoot, and he had collected all these Bigfoot stool samples. And so I would call in at like 6:15 in the morning and do this character for them. His name is Dr. Ramachandran. And I had a blast doing that. So then Tank decides he's leaving. And I get a call one day out of the blue, and Britta goes, hey, Tank's leaving. Do you think that you would like to be on the morning show with Scotch and I? And I, well, God, Britta's like my work wife already. We have a great chemistry. I loved working with Scotch. That was sweet. So I said, sure, that sounds like fun. She goes, okay, listen, we'll talk to the powers that be, but I think you should plan on subbing in this next week when Tank is gone. So I came in, I subbed in, and I think they listened to it, and they said, well, yeah, these guys have got great chemistry. This sounds fine. So I went in for my interview with a guy named Mike Waters. Mike goes, okay, so here's the deal. So Tank is our sports guy, so you'll have to do the sports every morning, and we're kind of looking for like a man's man for this. And I was like, oh, okay, well, it was really nice to meet you. You're looking for somebody else. He goes, well, I think you can do it. And I'm like, you have no idea. Like, first of all, I don't know half the bands you're playing on this station. I'm not a rock person. I'm an oldies at best. And if there was an all show tunes channel, that's what I'd be listening
Rodgers
to.
and Hammerstein, I'm there.
Yeah, Hammerstein.
That's how I like to say it.
Hammerstein.
I'm covering JJ. Keep going.
Yep. So I get placed on this show, and it's going well. We've got a great, it's going really well. And I'm only a part-timer, right? So I leave at the end of the show every day, but I have a blast. So 6 months in, we get called upstairs, and they said, we're flipping Rock 102. It's gone. No more. But we're starting a family-friendly station called Mix 1019. Would you like to continue having your morning show on Mix? And so we were like, well, yeah, I'd love to still have a job. That'd be great. So we start on this new station that is geared more towards women and something you can listen to in the car with the kids and be fine. And that went really well. We did that for a year. And then we got pulled up into a meeting, and they're like, we are getting rid of Mix.
Which is what happens in radio. There's high turnover.
Yep, it's called flipping a station. Yep. And so, and most of the time, people just get canned.
Yep.
But for whatever reason, they really liked the synergy between Scotch, Britta, and I. And they said, well, we want to keep you guys around. So this time, unfortunately, they've filled it with a station that actually doesn't have any personalities on it.
Okay.
But they wanted to keep Scotch and Britta to work on this station and be the brand ambassadors for it. So then I think, They want to keep Scotch and Brita. There's no place for
Getting
JJ.
the heave-ho, maybe.
So they said, okay, JJ, here's the deal. We're interested in knowing if you would be willing to move over to KFGO, which is, it's 70 years old. This is the station, the number one station in this region.
Yep.
It's listened to by more people than you can believe, from the most successful business individuals to to the average commuter, to the person who's just got it playing in the barn. People listen to it while they're combining. It is the go-to radio. It is the WNBC of the Upper Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said, we'd like you to, give KFGO a try. Maybe it'd be a thing. When I was a kid and I'd ride down to the lake, my mom or my dad drove separately, and you'd ride with one parent. My mom always had my sister for whatever reason, and taught my sister about the Beatles and Dusty Springfield. And, there's some good disco, but it's mostly bad. And my dad listened to KFGO, and he listened to the Ag Report. And I just thought, God, it's the longest 75 minutes ever. I hate it. And something clicked when I was in my mid-20s, and I started listening to AM talk radio. And I started, God, these guys are engaging with their community. They're sharing the news. They're the ones who are reporting about, power outages, or even if you have a lost pet. They're the ones who are interviewing the people who are, running for office, who are in office. They're talking to the people who are making billion-dollar decisions for our state. And I thought, well, this is interesting, so I'll get more into this. And so I really started listening to KFGO. So that was my ultimate dream when I started working there, was to get on KFGO. And now that's where I am happy enough to be right now. Will it be the place I'm at for the rest of my life? I don't know.
I mean, with the notion that stations flip, I mean, just like crazy. Just the fact that there is turnover,
but
like that.
I can tell you this: KFGO will never flip.
Sure,
it is.
What
it
about
is that
what about
much of an
flipping
institution?
Personalities or certain shows, though?
That definitely can happen.
Okay.
So, there's a high turnover, but that's kind of the thing about KFGO. That's why it's a little bit of a different beast. Is you take someone like Tom Wynn was on KFGO for 40 years.
Wow.
KFGO doesn't just, usually get rid of people. Most of the time people leave that station because they think there's a greener pasture someplace else. It is one of the only stations that actually is manned 24/7. So you could call that station right now and somebody would pick up the phone. If you had like a road report. So like there's a bunch of cows blocking a road up near Pembina. And then they could flip on the mic and let that be known.
It's a good thing that the powers that be never heard about the United Nations Musical Comedy Hour.
Which is funny because our voiceover guy for that is Mr. Steve Poitras, who is also on KFGO.
I was actually on Steve's show a number of years ago, and that was when I got to experience the 5 a.m. wake up. And I'm sure the first 20 minutes of that show, I was just... Because I... Rarely do I wake myself up with an alarm.
Yeah.
I've worked in the kinds of jobs that are really more deadline focused and less about specific office hours. And so I've been able to just wake up when my body wakes up and I go. So getting up at that particular hour, I don't know if I'd be able to do that for a full-time job. I guess you get used to it though, right? It becomes part of your routine.
Yeah.
How late do you get up now?
So I still get up at like 6:30.
Okay.
And then I'm into the studio by 7:30. I am a much nicer person when I'm not getting up at 3 a.m. and having to be into the studio, because the show starts at 5:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Which means you need to actually they call it prep. So my show, it goes from 11 to 2. So if I get there at 7:30, I have 3.5 hours to figure out what to talk about for 3 hours. So if you think of the same thing for a morning show, you got to be there by 3 o'clock. To give you 2.5 hours.
We do like 10 minutes of prep for each of these fucking episodes.
I know, right? And look how well it turns out. Now, if only we could bring in the sponsorship dollars.
Yeah, well, we're going to work on that. We're going to get there.
Yeah. I think Goodfellow, those Goodfellow pants.
Absolutely.
And they're stylish, too. They have a pair of salmon-colored pants I get a lot of compliments on.
So here's a weird question, I guess. How do you balance the notion that, you're on this family-friendly show, you're on a family-friendly channel, most people in town know you as that that person who's on there, and then you get to come on this podcast and make dick and fart jokes.
Yeah.
I mean, how does
Well, and Linebenders occasionally gets raunchy too, and
sure.
I've done several short films for you where I'm dressed in baby's clothes as a giant baby.
Absolutely.
I think that there is an understanding with me. I'm cut from a different kind of cloth.
I guess context too, like what they hear you doing in one place, they're not necessarily going to expect you doing the same in the other.
And we also live in a world right now where people have a million different methods of communication. And so if they told me tomorrow, hey, listen, you need to stop doing your podcast, I would say, actually, I need to quit my job because I don't want to be stifled in any way from having any form of communication with people. And this is a creative outlet for me.
Yeah.
One of the reasons you hired me is because I'm creative and I'm spontaneous and I'm fun. And the way that engine gets tuned is by being able to do stuff like this.
And that's really why we started this podcast. I mean, I've been in a similar situation, not in radio, but I've been working in media production for almost my entire adult professional life. And so all of the time and energy I put into making pieces of media belong to someone else, and they get to make the final call if it's what it should be or not. And I'm taking their notes and doing what they want to do. And while that's part of the gig, I have no problem with that. If you're someone who's creative and has the desire to make things that they like, then only having those forms of media production in your life are tough. You know, when you're creating something, if you're a painter or you're a director or set designer or whatever, as you're making it, your primary job is to stand in for the audience, right? You are the audience's eyes before they get to see it. And so you get to craft something that you think is good. And, you know, with this podcast, at least we get to make something that's ours. And also it's only audio, which is awesome.
Yeah, you really like that.
Well, yeah, because even though I love video, producing a TV show if that's like running an Ultraman marathon, recording a podcast is like walking your dog around the block twice, right? Like I could do that, no sweat. Yeah. Twice a week, no problem.
Yeah, easy.
No problem.
I could do that.
Anyways, JJ, thank you so much for appearing today on JJ Meets World. I know you took a lot of time out of your busy schedule to be on this podcast today. And
hey, this is a lot of fun. It's very interesting being on this side of the interview seat.
Yeah.
The seating. We changed our seating drastically for this podcast. So I would like to do this again, but I would like to interview you sometime.
We'll do that. Okay. Well, let's say, this is episode 24.
Sure.
48. Episode 48.
What?
We could lock it down. Another 24 episodes? I don't know. I'm just saying a thing.
Yeah.
You can interview.
This is why I'm the host and you're
absolutely
the producer.
Absolutely. I've just been drowning over here this whole time.
I know. Has it been difficult?
No, actually, no.
You're sweating real bad.
That's because I'm a fatty.
Oh, yep. Okay. So you're marinating.
That's absolutely merely what my heart does to my body when I'm resting.
We should do our next episode with our shirts off.
Oof. Yeah, why not?
Also, we got a real
there's a window here. There's two windows here.
Chessboard thing because I'm wearing a white shirt and you're wearing a black shirt right now.
Ebony and ivory.
All right, that does it. Let's bottle this thing up.
JJ Meets World.
Well, that does it for today's episode. If you'd like to help us keep the lights on by donating to our Patreon, you can find us at www.jjmeetsworld.com. It's also a great place to keep up on previous episodes. You can also find us on social media. You can follow us on Twitter. Maybe you want to find us on Facebook, Instagram, just not MySpace. And if you are interested in rating us on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, or wherever you consume the podcasts that you love, we sure would appreciate a 5-star or however they choose to review certain things. 4 boots, 4 crab shacks, 1,000,000 horses, whatever it happens to be. Tucker Lucas produces JJ Meets World each and every week. You can find more of Tucker's work at www.moonbasemaria.com. If you want to see what JJ's up to, you can follow him at 701JJ Gordon on Twitter. All right, listen, I didn't want to tell you this before we started, but I had just the worst horseradish yesterday. And I feel it right here in my throat. Could you hear that through the whole podcast?